A tracker like him must pass on his genes. The alien Huntress was beyond impressed. On the distant world of Kareth Prime, the land was wild and loud. Creatures called Skyrunners screamed at dawn. Heavy grazers shook the ground as they moved in herds. Even the plants reacted to danger, folding and hissing when something passed too close. Nothing here ever moved in silence, yet silence had begun to spread. Entire hunting zones went quiet. No alarms were triggered. No signs of struggle were found. Prey animals vanished without blood, without broken ground, without fear signals. It was as if the planet itself had chosen to forget them. That was why the Council sent her. She was known across her species as one of the finest trackers alive. Her people were born hunters. Their senses were sharp. Their instincts were trained from childhood. They believed no prey could hide forever. Everything left a trace. Everything made a mistake. At least that was what they believed before humans. The Huntress landed alone, her ship settling gently on the dark soil. She stepped out and tasted the air with her senses. The land felt wrong, too calm, too balanced, as if someone had already shown it respect. She activated her tracking tools, scanning for heat, motion, and scent. The data showed nothing unusual. That worried her more than chaos ever could. She began to walk. Her steps were light, her body moving with trained grace. She followed a trail where a herd of grazers should have passed only hours before. The ground showed no panic marks, no crushed plants, no broken patterns, just clean earth and careful movement. Someone had guided the animals away. That was not how hunters worked. Hunters chased. They forced mistakes. They drove prey into fear. This was something else. As the sun lowered, she found the first proof. A single footprint pressed into the soil. It was shallow, almost erased, but it was there. The shape was wrong for any native creature. Two narrow impressions side by side, balanced, controlled. A human footprint. She felt a flicker of disbelief. Humans were known across the stars, but never like this. They were loud, emotional, short-lived. They relied on machines, numbers, and chance. No human should be able to survive alone on Kareth Prime, let alone hunt without disturbance. She followed the footprint. The trail did not behave like a normal trail. It appeared, vanished, then appeared again far away. It doubled back for no reason, then crossed over rock where no mark should exist. Several times she was certain she had lost it, only to find a small sign placed where she would look. Not careless, not accidental, intentional. Night fell, but the forest did not grow louder. Instead, it stayed quiet as if listening. The Huntress slowed her breathing. A good hunter knew when she was no longer alone. She paused near a ridge and scanned the darkness. Nothing moved. No heat spikes, no sound, yet her instincts told her she was being watched. She felt no threat. That confused her more than fear would have. Most prey panicked when cornered. Most rivals tried to dominate. This presence did neither. It simply observed. She set a camp, deliberately making small, visible movements. She wanted to see if the watcher would react. She placed her tools in open view, adjusted her position, and even left a trail leading away from her shelter. Nothing happened. When she slept, she dreamed of eyes in the dark that did not blink. At dawn, she woke to find her camp untouched. But something new rested on a nearby stone. A small object, simple and crafted by hand. A loop of plant fiber tied with care. A signal, not a warning, not a challenge, a greeting. Her hearts beat faster. No hunter she knew would reveal themselves like this. She examined the object. The knot was precise, strong, efficient. It told a story of someone who understood materials deeply. She looked up slowly. Across the clearing at the edge of the trees stood the human. He did not hide, he did not advance. He simply stood, hands visible, posture relaxed. He wore no armor, only layered fabric suited to the environment. His tools were basic, nothing advanced, nothing threatening. He looked ordinary. That was the most unsettling part. The Huntress studied him closely. His eyes moved constantly, not in fear, but in awareness. He watched the wind, the ground, the trees. He was not focused on her alone. He was connected to everything around him. This was not a hunter who forced control. This was a hunter who earned it. The human spoke first, his voice calm and low. The translator in her gear worked slowly, then formed meaning. He acknowledged her presence. He named the land. He apologized for entering her people's claimed zone without notice. He explained he was tracking, not killing, guiding prey away from danger zones to protect the balance. Protect. The word echoed in her mind. She responded carefully, asking why a human would come alone to such a world. His answer was simple. He was hired to solve a problem. Disappearing prey, failing systems, fear of collapse. He solved problems by understanding them. They walked together for a time, not as enemies, not as allies, but as two beings reading the same ground. He pointed out signs she had missed, tiny changes in leaf angle, slight shifts in soil moisture, patterns of insect movement. She felt something unfamiliar, humility. Everything she had been taught said her species were the best trackers in the galaxy. Yet this human, with no enhancements and no weapons, moved through the world as if it welcomed him. When she asked how he avoided detection, he seemed confused. He said he was not hiding. He was simply not fighting the environment. That idea unsettled her deeply. As the sun climbed higher, she realized something important. The missing prey had not been taken. They had been relocated, protected from overhunting, from panic, from imbalance. The human was not a predator. He was a guardian. As they parted ways, he left her with one final statement. He said humans learned long ago that survival was not about strength or speed, but about endurance and care. Those who listened lived longer than those who conquered. The Huntress watched him disappear into the forest, leaving no trail she could follow. For the first time in her life, she understood that the greatest hunters were not those who chased. They were those who were never noticed at all, and deep within her, a thought began to grow. If such traits could shape the future, then humanity was far more important than the galaxy believed. Her body rested, but her thoughts stayed active. Again and again, she replayed the human's movements in her mind. The way he stood without tension. The way his eyes scanned the land, not her alone. The way the forest seemed to accept him as if he belonged there. At first light, she rose and studied the ground where he had vanished. She expected nothing. Still, she looked. There was no trail, not because he erased it, but because he never forced one into existence. The soil lay natural. The plants stood unharmed. Even the insects moved freely. It was as if he had passed like a shadow made of patience. This disturbed her deeply. Her people believed that a hunter proved skill by marks left behind. Broken branches, deep prints, clear evidence of pursuit. To leave nothing meant either failure or weakness, yet the human had succeeded without either. She began her own tracking, not of the human, but of the prey he had guided away. She followed signs he had shown her the day before. Small, gentle changes, patterns instead of chaos. It took longer, it required more thought, but it worked. By midday, she found the grazers. They were calm. They fed without fear, without tight formations, without the constant signs of stress that came from being hunted. Their movements were balanced, their numbers stable. This was wrong by every lesson she had learned. Predators created fear. Fear kept prey alert. Alert prey survived. That was the rule. But here, without fear, the prey still thrived. She observed for hours unseen. No predator approached. The ecosystem moved in harmony. Something about the human's actions had shifted the balance, not broken it. She recorded everything. When she returned to her temporary base, her people contacted her. The council demanded answers. Why had the prey vanished? Why were their sensors useless? Why had one human disrupted centuries of proven hunting doctrine? She hesitated before responding. For the first time in her career, she did not know how to explain what she had witnessed without challenging everything her people believed. She told them the truth. She said the human did not hunt like them. He did not chase or dominate. He studied. He waited. He moved only when the land allowed it. She said their tools failed because they looked for aggression, not intention. The council was silent. Then the questions came, sharp and defensive. Was the human a threat? Was he undermining their authority? Could his methods be copied? She answered carefully. She said he was not a threat. He had no interest in control. She said copying him would take more than tools. It would require a different way of thinking. That answer was not well received. The council ordered her to continue observation, but also to test the human. They wanted to see his limits. They wanted proof that he was not superior, only different. She agreed, though something in her resisted. The next day, she returned to the forest and deliberately changed her behavior. She moved faster. She broke branches. She disturbed the ground. She acted as her people expected a hunter to act. It took less than an hour for the forest to respond. Animals fled. Insects scattered. Alarm signals echoed through the plants. The calm shattered, and somewhere she felt the human notice. She sensed him before she saw him, a shift in the air. A quiet presence adjusting to the disturbance. He did not approach immediately. He waited, watching how the land reacted to her actions. When he finally appeared, his expression was not angry. It was concerned. He spoke gently, asking why she was forcing movement where none was needed. He pointed to the signs she had caused, stress patterns, fear responses. He explained how such actions weakened ecosystems over time. She listened, feeling something unfamiliar again: embarrassment. She admitted she was testing him. She explained her people's doubts. She asked him directly how he did what he did, what training he had, what enhancements supported him. The human shook his head. He said he had none. He spoke of human history, of long journeys on foot, of learning to read weather, animals, and land because failure meant death. He explained that humans survived not by being strongest, but by continuing when others stopped. Endurance. He said humans learned to listen because they had no other choice. As they walked together again, he demonstrated. He showed how to move so weight spread evenly, how to pause so the land could settle, how to let animals see you without fear by matching their rhythm. The Huntress tried to copy him. She failed. Not completely, but enough to understand the gap between knowledge and instinct. Her body wanted to dominate space. His blended into it. She asked him why he chose to work alone. He answered simply, fewer people meant fewer disturbances. It was easier to hear the world when it was quiet. That answer stayed with her. Later that day, a storm approached. The sky darkened, winds shifted suddenly. Her people's forecasts had not predicted this. The human noticed immediately. He adjusted his pace, changed direction, and guided them toward natural shelter before the storm fully formed. When the rain came, it was heavy and sudden. They waited in silence as water poured down. She realized then that his awareness extended beyond sight and sound. He felt changes, subtle pressure shifts, patterns most species ignored. When the storm passed, he rose and continued as if nothing had happened. To him, it was normal. To her, it was astonishing. That night, she sent another report to the council. She spoke of human endurance, of perception, of balance. She suggested that humans were not competitors but assets, partners who could help stabilize worlds instead of strip them. The response was divided. Some elders dismissed her words as fascination. Others expressed concern. A few asked questions, quiet and thoughtful. One message stood out. If humans possess such traits naturally, then their genetic value may exceed expectations. The Huntress read that line several times. She returned her gaze to the forest, where the human moved calmly under the stars, leaving no mark behind. For the first time, she wondered if the greatest hunt her people would ever face was not about capturing humans, but understanding them. And deep within her, admiration began to shift into something stronger. The next morning began with a quiet change. The forest was still calm, but not in the same way as before. The Huntress sensed tension, not fear, but attention. The land was listening. Something important was about to happen. She found the human near a shallow stream, kneeling and studying the water. He had removed his footwear and let his feet rest in the current. He was not resting. He was learning. She watched from a distance, careful not to disturb him. He placed small stones in the water, observing how the flow changed. He traced patterns in the wet soil, then erased them gently with his hand. He was reading time itself. When he noticed her, he smiled slightly, as if he had known she was there all along. She approached and told him about the council's growing interest. She did not hide the truth. She explained that some of her people now believed humans were too valuable to ignore, that they wanted more data, more proof, more certainty. The human listened without reacting. His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with focus. He said he understood. He explained that humans were often misunderstood because they rarely showed their full ability unless pushed. He said endurance did not look impressive until others stopped moving. The Huntress asked what would happen if her people pushed too far. He did not answer directly. Instead, he asked her to follow him. They traveled deeper into the forest than she had gone before. The terrain became more difficult. The ground sloped unevenly. The air grew thicker. Her steps became heavier. The human never slowed. He adjusted his pace to the land, not to her. When the ground was loose, he shifted weight. When it was steep, he angled his body. Every movement had purpose. After hours, they reached an open area where the forest ended suddenly. Beyond it lay broken land, cracked soil, sparse growth, a place where life struggled. The Huntress recognized it at once. A dead zone. Her people had hunted there heavily generations ago. The land never recovered. Sensors showed minimal life. The council had written it off as a natural failure. The human stepped forward and knelt. He touched the soil. He closed his eyes. The Huntress felt uneasy. This place carried shame for her species. Nothing grew here, nothing thrived. The human spoke quietly. He said the land was not dead. It was exhausted. He explained that life did not vanish. It retreated. It waited. He began to show her signs she had never noticed. Tiny cracks where moisture gathered, insects hiding beneath rocks, faint roots pushing upwards slowly, patiently. Life was still trying. He explained that humans learned to survive on damaged worlds, worlds stripped by war, misuse, and pride. They learned that healing took time and restraint, not force. Then he did something unexpected. He asked her to track him. Surprised, she agreed. He walked into the dead zone without hesitation. She followed. At first she saw nothing, no prints, no broken ground. Then slowly, carefully, she began to notice changes, slight pressure marks, displaced dust, tiny shadows where his weight shifted. It was difficult. Much harder than tracking any prey, she had to slow her thoughts, stop assuming, start observing. Minutes passed, then hours. For the first time, she felt mental exhaustion before physical strain. Her mind resisted the patience required. Finally, she lost the trail. She stopped and admitted it. The human returned not from ahead but from behind her. He had circled without her noticing. He did not mock her. He explained that human tracking was not about seeing more but about expecting less. Humans assumed the land would hide them, so they worked with it, not against it. The Huntress felt something break inside her. Pride, not in anger, not in shame, but in release. She sent a live transmission to the council from that place. She showed them the dead zone. She showed them the signs of life. She showed them how the human moved without harm. She spoke plainly. She said their way of hunting had scars, that humans carried lessons written in survival, not dominance, that ignoring them would be a mistake greater than fear. The council argued among themselves. Voices overlapped, doubt clashed with curiosity. Then one elder asked a question that changed everything. Could humans teach this to others? The Huntress looked at the human. He answered before she could. He said yes, but only to those willing to listen, only to those ready to unlearn. That answer divided the council further. Some demanded control, some demanded access. A few demanded partnership. The transmission ended without resolution. Later, as night fell, strange lights appeared in the sky. Not stars, ships, council observers. The Huntress felt tension rise. This was no longer quiet study. This was politics, power, fear. She warned the human. He nodded, unsurprised. He said this always happened when humans were noticed. Curiosity turned into possession. The observers landed at a distance. Drones activated. Scanners swept the land. Immediately, the forest reacted. Animals fled. Insects hid. The balance fractured. The Huntress watched in alarm as systems failed to understand what was happening. The scanners reported chaos, false readings, impossible patterns. The human remained still. He told her to watch. As the machines struggled, he moved. Not fast, not slow, precisely. He walked through sensor-blind spots created by natural interference. He used terrain and moisture to break scans. He adjusted posture and rhythm until even the machines could not predict him. Within minutes, he vanished. The observers panicked. Systems showed no trace. Then one by one their drones shut down, not damaged, simply confused, overloaded by conflicting natural data. The Huntress realized the truth. Humans did not fight technology, they overwhelmed it with reality. The human returned to her side quietly as if nothing had happened. He said this was why humans preferred not to be noticed. Once observed, they were measured. Once measured, they were feared. She looked at him with new understanding. He was not just a tracker. He was a living example of adaptation beyond prediction. As the observers withdrew, uncertain and unsettled, the Huntress knew the balance had shifted. Her people could no longer pretend humans were insignificant. And deep in her mind, a thought formed with clarity and weight. If such traits could be lost, they must be preserved. If such endurance could fade, it must continue. The idea no longer felt strange. It felt necessary, and the galaxy was not ready for what that realization would bring. Instead, it brought attention. Across Kareth Prime, systems adjusted, patrol routes changed. Observation satellites lingered longer than before. The land noticed. The Huntress noticed too. She felt watched in a way she never had before. The human sensed it as well. He said nothing at first, but his movements changed. He avoided open ground. He spent more time still listening. His awareness widened not just of the forest, but of the sky. The Huntress walked beside him in silence. She was no longer trying to test him. She was trying to understand. Her people contacted her again. This time the message was not just from the council. It carried voices from multiple clans. Elders, researchers, genetic scholars, they all wanted answers. They asked about the human's endurance, his adaptability, his calm under pressure. They asked how such traits could exist without enhancements. She answered honestly. She said humans evolved under constant struggle, harsh climates, limited resources, long migrations. Survival favored those who could last, not those who burned bright and failed early. She said humans were shaped by patience. The response was heavy with interest. Some voices spoke of alliances, others spoke of controlled studies, a few spoke of preservation. They used careful words, but the meaning beneath them was clear. Humans were being reclassified, not as minor allies, as a resource. The Huntress felt unease rise within her. Her people had always valued strong hunters. Those with rare traits were honored but also managed. Protected, directed. She looked at the human walking ahead of her, stepping lightly over roots and stone, unaware of the discussions happening light years away, or perhaps not unaware. That night she told him everything. She spoke of the council's interest, of genetic discussions, of proposals forming around him and his kind. She did not soften the truth. The human listened quietly. When she finished, he sat down on a fallen log and stared into the darkness for a long time. He said humans had faced this before. He spoke of times in their history when strength, intelligence, or resilience had made groups targets, when being valuable meant losing freedom. He said humans learned caution from those lessons. The Huntress asked if he was afraid. He thought for a moment, then said fear was useful, but panic was not. He said as long as someone listened, there was hope. She realized then that he was not thinking only of himself. He was thinking of his entire species. The next day, representatives arrived in person. Not soldiers, not hunters, envoys. They landed near the edge of the forest and requested a meeting, formal, peaceful, controlled. The Huntress accompanied the human to the clearing. She stayed close, not as guard, but as witness. The envoys spoke with practiced calm. They praised human adaptability. They praised cooperation. They spoke of shared futures and mutual benefit. Then they spoke of legacy. They said traits like his should not be lost to chance, that the galaxy was unstable, that survival demanded preparation. That cooperation could take many forms. The human listened politely. When they finished, he asked a simple question. Would humans have a choice? The envoys paused. They spoke of responsibility, of duty, of the greater good. They did not say yes. The silence that followed was heavy. The Huntress felt something harden inside her. Her people prized clarity in the hunt. Deception was for prey, not leaders. She spoke up. She reminded them that humans were not tools. That partnership required respect. That taking without consent was not cooperation. The envoys responded carefully. They said no harm was intended, that humans would be honored, elevated, preserved. That word struck the human deeply. He said preservation without freedom was a cage. The meeting ended without agreement. As the envoys departed, tension spread through the forest like a held breath. The Huntress knew what would come next. Pressure, subtle at first, increased monitoring, restricted zones, incentives, requests. She also knew the human would not submit quietly. That evening she found him preparing to leave the region. Not fleeing but moving, changing patterns, staying ahead of attention. She asked him where he would go. He said anywhere the land still listened. She asked if humans would always be running. He shook his head. He said humans ran only until someone stood with them. That statement stayed with her long after he moved on. She returned to her people alone. In the council chamber, debate raged. Some saw opportunity slipping away. Others felt unease. A small group supported her warnings, but they were outnumbered. She stood before them and spoke with clarity. She said humans were not rare because of genetics alone, but because of experience. You could not extract patience. You could not isolate endurance. It was built over generations of choice and consequence. She said forcing humans would destroy the very traits they admired. Some listened. Others dismissed her as compromised. Then she made a choice that surprised even herself. She invoked an ancient right, one rarely used, one reserved for matters of survival beyond war. She claimed the human as her equal, not prey, not resource. Equal. Under their laws, this meant any action against him would be an act against her clan, against her honor. The chamber fell silent. The elders argued fiercely, but law was law, tradition bound them. They could observe, they could negotiate, they could not take. The Huntress left the chamber knowing she had changed her place among her people forever. Back on Karath Prime, the human felt the shift before she returned. Monitoring eased. Pressure withdrew. When she found him again days later, he listened as she explained what she had done. He studied her carefully. He asked why. She answered honestly. She said the galaxy needed humans free, not controlled, not harvested, free to choose when to help and when to walk away. She said traits born from freedom could not survive captivity. The human nodded slowly. He said humans would remember this. They walked together one last time through the forest. The land felt calmer, not untouched but respected. The Huntress realized that her admiration had become commitment, not romantic, not possessive, purposeful. Her people had always believed the greatest duty was to ensure strong bloodlines. She now understood that strength was not something you took. It was something you protected. As they parted, the human told her something important. He said humanity would face many tests in the coming cycles. Curiosity would turn into pressure again. Fear would follow. But now they would not face it alone. The Huntress watched him disappear into the trees, knowing that the final choice had not yet been made. But it was coming, and when it did, the galaxy would have to decide whether it wanted humans as possessions or as partners in survival. The change did not happen all at once. It began quietly in small places where humans and others worked side by side, on border worlds, on damaged planets, on stations that struggled to survive. Word spread not through announcements but through results. Ecosystems stabilized. Resources lasted longer, conflicts faded without force, and always somewhere in the background there were humans, walking, listening, adjusting, enduring. The Huntress watched this unfold from a distance at first. After her declaration before the council, she was no longer only a tracker, she became a symbol. Some praised her courage, others watched her with suspicion, but none could deny the evidence. Worlds where humans were allowed to work freely improved. Worlds where they were restricted stagnated. The council requested another meeting. This time the tone was different. They did not summon her, they asked. She traveled to the chamber once more, carrying no weapons, no tools, only experience. The elders spoke carefully. They admitted their earlier approach had been flawed. They said fear had guided their curiosity. They said they had underestimated the cost of control. One elder asked the question everyone waited for. What did humans want? The Huntress answered truthfully. She said humans wanted the same thing they always had. A chance to live, to choose, to help when asked and to walk away when not. She said humans did not seek to dominate the galaxy. They barely survived their own worlds for most of their history. What they offered was not power but persistence. She explained that humans did not measure success in conquest but in tomorrow still existing. That answer stayed with the council long after she left. On Karath Prime, the human continued his work. He was no longer alone. Other humans joined him quietly, carefully. They did not arrive with banners or demands. They arrived with patience. The forest changed, not dramatically, not suddenly. It healed in small ways. Growth returned to damaged areas. Animals adapted without fear. Balance formed where chaos once ruled. The Huntress walked among them again, not as observer but as participant. She learned human methods slowly, not copying but understanding. She failed often. Humans did not correct her with words. They demonstrated, repeated, waited. That patience humbled her more than any defeat ever had. One evening, as the sky turned deep blue and the stars emerged, she sat with the human by a quiet ridge. They watched the land breathe beneath them. She asked him something she had carried for a long time. Why did humans keep helping, even when misunderstood, restricted, or feared? The human thought carefully. He said humans learned early that isolation led to extinction. That survival was easier when shared. That the future belonged not to the strongest alone, but to those who could cooperate without losing themselves. He said humans helped because someday they might need help too. That answer spread far beyond Karath Prime. It reached the council, the clans. Other species watching from afar. Slowly, policies changed. Humans were no longer classified as resources. They were classified as stabilizers, advisors, partners. Some still resisted. Fear does not vanish easily, but the direction was set. The Huntress received a final message from the council months later. They acknowledged her choice. They acknowledged her warning. They admitted that strength without restraint had cost them more than they understood. They asked her to help shape new traditions. She accepted. Not because she sought power, but because she had learned what happened when no one spoke for balance. Across the galaxy, stories began to circulate, not exaggerated legends but quiet accounts. A human who walked through storms without fear. A human who calmed panicked colonies by staying when others fled. A human who restored land thought lost forever. The galaxy stopped asking how humans fought. They started asking how humans lasted. The Huntress often thought back to her first meeting with the Tracker. How ordinary he had looked, how dangerous that assumption had been. Humans were not impressive at first glance. They did not shine, they did not roar. They stayed. Years later, when the first interspecies preservation accord was signed, it did not mention genes. It mentioned values, endurance, choice, respect, freedom. The Huntress stood among many representatives, watching humans sign as equals, not subjects. She felt something close to pride, not ownership, recognition. After the ceremony, she walked with the human one last time. Age had touched him, but it had not weakened him. His steps were slower, but his awareness deeper. She asked if he believed the galaxy had truly changed. He smiled gently. He said change was never finished, but now it had direction. As they parted, she realized something important. Her people had once believed the greatest trackers must pass on their genes to ensure survival. They were wrong. The greatest legacy was not blood. It was understanding. Humans had passed that on without ever trying. They had simply lived, and the galaxy, finally paying attention, chose to follow, not because it was forced, but because at last it understood what real strength looked like.